So with that stated, here's something that Jesse mentioned, which was in the past, he had actually treated it much more like your ordinary skill based resolution roll, where we take it all the way up to the point where the moment of execution has occurred. Now, make your speech. Now let's find out, whether they like it or not, is sort of the way it's done in many role playing games. And to do that, what I stated in that thread was that I found that very painful in the pool, because now the narration is kind of like, yeah, okay, or yeah, no, and
Right.
that's all you got. And then the other thing that I mentioned, which is what you were asking about, the tendency not just to state the execution and the outcome, or the intended outcome, and I want to kill that guy and I want to throw him down the cliff, and
Yeah.
that, but stated that if I succeed, that will be the way, right? That's
Yes.
right.
Yes.
So, but not even just that, but also stating things about the situation way, way, way after this whole thing is over. And then I am proclaimed the champion of, then the princess decides she wants to marry me. And you're kind of like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Scenes are inside, a
Yep.
larger situation. This outcome of this conflict is inside a scene. If you go to my other set of arrows where I talk about, scenes, affecting situations,
Yep.
I mean, how much of the pool is about the blue arrows going into another scene, and how much of it too is about, a special gold arrow bouncing up and hitting situation really, really hard. And the answer is that it can have some aspects of that, but I think they're very provisional, and they should, in
Yep.
my opinion, be working with the known rather than bringing in sudden unknown things like this princess we've never heard of suddenly wanting to marry your character.
And that makes sense. And I
So, yeah.
my question partly prompted again, my own game. I think there's been an a creep in how much is being the players. I'm not trying to say the players are trying to get away with something or make it sound like it's antagonist or anything, but trying to get more into it to be more kind of locking more down before we get to the role. And it wasn't the case at the beginning, but now, especially in this, again, the second chapter,
Mhm.
as and maybe it's because now there's more invested in Jean Jacques, or there's more kind of clarity, or the they're trying to kind of push the boundaries of that. And I'm trying to kind of
It's a good question, because
adjust around the what's
because yeah,
functional.
yeah, there is, of course, no, like, there is no text or play history, design history of the pool that allows us to actually say what it is. It just, for what really all we've got is the question has been raised from, in terms of
Yeah.
looking at the pool and saying, okay, I'm going to play the pool. Well, you have to understand that this question has been raised. And the way I'm looking at it is that I basically say, once the monologue is over and the monologue is required to do the execution and a bit, and the immediate effect, a little more effect, a little backtracking to the initiation, that's fine, but it's centered on that execution of the outcome. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what we're doing here. In terms of the authorities and players, you have outcome authority. Done, right? And so the narration of the authority that pertains to that. The wiggle room in either direction, going forward a little, going back a little, that's there, but not to the extent that you get to have arrow number 4. Not to the
Right.
extent that arrow number 4 about the new now, given that outcome, that's the GM. That's their
Yeah.
job. And so I think that makes a lot more sense to me.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But it is also worth pointing out that we're leaving out, again, that question that I mentioned a bit ago: how much newness can be introduced. And I think that's something that a group has to discover.
Right.
That, and it also may depend a great deal on the nature of the idiom in question. There are some things in which it would be uh, very destructive in the San Diego game to suddenly have, you know, somebody pop up out of the bushes, right, as, your sudden ally or your sudden enemy. Um, what on earth are they doing there? They're the people that they're involved with are, on the other side of San Diego. What the hell, right? Um, is that good or bad? I mean, arguably, you can always dream up edge cases where that actually would be brilliant.
Sure.
But then I can also, however, see other modes of play or other topics of play in which that wouldn't be an edge case, where the sudden or whimsical or the fact that during a monologue of victory the player can drop a colorful bomb on the situation is actually quite in keeping with what this whole thing is about, and it's not an edge case at all.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So I think that is something that you kind of have to look at. What the hell are we doing here? How much curveballs are part of what's going on here.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The risk of suddenly overriding what would have been conflict roles for that to happen, however, is real. A monologue of victory, in my opinion, should never be comparable to what you can do with a successful role.
Makes sense.
Sort of my thinking. But again, that's nowhere in the text as we see it.
Yeah.
Let's see. So is it my turn to ask you now?
Yeah. I think, you said you had a question about dice dynamics.
Yes. Well, it has to do with I actually went back through the videos that I've been playing, and I tracked okay, how many dice did they roll? How many pool dice did they use? Did they succeed? Did they fail? How many pool dice went away? What was their next pool now? And what and so I basically tracked that all the way along, and found that rather than the big fear is that you bleed dice, right? That the pool forces you to bleed dice. It only forces you to bleed dice if you bet huge amounts of pool every single time you roll. That's the only time. If you don't, it doesn't. And so it is kind of, and then that's one of the things that we've talked about is, reaching for that monologue of victory as if it were like the one desirable moment of play when you have the power, right, to affect, to guide the story. That whole story guiding thing, if you look at my little diagram of those 4 arrows, it's all about, if I get the monologue of victory, I get to have the 4th arrow, right? I get to tell the next part of the story. It's garbage. It's horrific. And that's why I brought up the intent thing. If you mistake intent for what you want for the story to do after it's all over, if you call that intent, then you think you're rolling to get to be the GM for the entire next setup for the next sequence of play. And that's it's horrible. That's just awful. And you can see it. You can see how thoroughly it got baked into people's idea of the concept of a lot of the games that people say are derived from the pool or that they feel are derived from the pool. But it's a wrong road.
Right.
I think it's a really wrong road to roll to be the powerful GM who makes the story go the way the story should go now.
Yeah.
So okay, I think I just closed out my thinking on that.
Yeah, makes sense.
But yeah, we're back to that dice dynamic thing. So anyway, I still haven't quite asked the question. What have you found about the way pools go kind of up and down and up and down?
We tend to have a pretty what we've seen in the first chapter was sort of medium betting, sort of medium wagering, so kind of wagering between like 50-60% of your pool at any given time, slowly increasing the pool, mostly not using the monologue of victory option, mostly increasing the pool. and then sort of saving it up for what, ended up being kind of the kind of major conflicts, and then risking more, and then having both a lot of success on the one character's hand, and then risking all the pool, and then dying on the other character's success, or with failure. So that's what we saw the first time around. In the second chapter, it was they took a different strategy, which is like going all in with their pool almost every single time, which was leading to
Yeah, you're going to end up with empty pools. Yeah,
which was leading to slowly increasing, and then emptying their. And then in the last, actually, it was 2 sessions ago. 2 sessions ago, uh, Jean-Jacques blew his whole pool on like the most important thing that he was trying for his character. It was pretty hard to watch, and then had to kind of start building it up again.
I have not found a bad thing about that. So far, I've actually find it fairly entertaining and fairly. I mean, it has that nice consequential feel. I mean, it's in some ways. I kind of want to say, well, what's the problem? The dice are doing what dice are supposed to do, which is fail sometimes, and it's supposed to affect your character's resources. How is that different from anything else?
I don't.
Right.
I think it's really cool. I think in the moment, there's, I don't know that we talk about this so much, but the connection between there is an emotional connection between kind of the instrumentation we're using and the fiction we're creating. Because if you just rolled as many dice as you can for this big important thing and you failed, like if all of those dice kind of betrayed you, and
you figure there's a lot more theme music
one,
playing now than there otherwise would be, right?
It just has a punch that you wouldn't get with that.
Even though the pool is the least representative mechanic in all of role playing.
Yeah.
There is no, it represents literally nothing. There's no fiction. And in our games, let's see, here's one of the interesting things about the San Diego game is that we have had a lot of successes, a lot of successful rolls. It's only been 2 sessions, but the rolls have been quite successful all the way along. So everybody's kind of, you can kind of feel they're waiting for the other shoe. They're like, all right, this is these successes were actually kind of driving our characters into more and more and more extreme, adversity. The more successful we are with these fairly intensive individualized acts, the more, the conflicts as they develop are going to become more and more consequential, more and more adverse. And the day will come. They're looking at their dice and they're saying, yeah, it's great. I can roll 7 or 8 dice, but the day will come. And in the Galactic game, where we've had 3 sessions with a lot of rolling, it's been a real nice mix. We've seen, but on the other hand, those particular players, I was, none of whom were familiar with the pool, they really bet very, very little. It's like 1 or 2 dice get bet at any given time. So their rolls tend to be, 4 or 5 dice at a time. However, there have been some nice failures and some nice successes, and so the pools have done a fair amount of wiggling, and I think everybody's kind of enjoying it. One player was very reluctant to do the monologue of victory because they were just a little bit, I don't want to say intimidated, they just saw it as a particular developmental step for themselves as a player, and so they took a little while to, get themselves up and running to actually do it. Which, I understand that. But once they did, then now they're, okay, this is my take in both of the games that I'm in right now. And it's very much where I want to be. I'm very happy with it. People take the monologue of victory in the heat of the moment. It has nothing to do with something like, this is the most important thing. I mean, if this particular conflict is very, very important for your character, who cares who narrates it?
Yep.
right? I mean, it's okay. So to treat it as kind of a who cares who narrates, but this particular time my mouth is running away with me, so I'll just do it, and that's the only criterion you have, is actually not that bad a thing. There was one person who was low in pool dice, and they were like, "No, I really do want the monologue at this time. Never mind, strategically I could
Yep.
take that +1, but who cares? I'm feeling it. I want to sound like this. I want it to, I want it to sound like this, and here's what it sounds like." And I think that's actually a very positive attitude, to treat it as very much a, gee, I'd really like to do this right now.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And have no, okay, now I've built up my pool. Okay, now I'm going to, now it's time for that monologue of victory attempt. That there's something that is pretty basically unfun
Yeah.
doing that.
Uh, yeah. I think kind of an attitude that the monologue of victory is sort of super precious isn't is not the right approach.
So
Or we gotta save it. We gotta save it for the big moment rather
right,
than
right, exactly.
let it kind of come out. That makes sense to me.
Oh, and also, I don't know if you noticed that with what I've implemented in both of those games, in fact, on the fly, as far as the Galactic game was concerned, was to say, okay, at the beginning of the session, grab, everybody gets +1 die.
Yeah.
And it's not really because I'm like worried that people's pools are too low. It just feels good.
Yeah.
It has no other value. And you have a little more to work with than you did at the end of the last session. And what's the harm?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And statistically, it's not much. What, 2-3%?
Yeah, it doesn't.
Right? 4 or 5%. So, yeah, it's kind of nice to. I've noticed it. Everybody just kind of gets a nice warm fuzzy at that moment, and it's a nice jump into play.
Do you see your players going all in a lot, or?
Well, aside from the frog game, where that was kind of an issue, in these games, as I say, the tendency seems to be to bet in a couple, one or
Yeah.
two, and then I think a couple of players have had substantial pools there, and so they're like, oh well, I'm going to throw in 4, at a time, just because they're there to be done. But actually, unless I'm wrong, I'd have to go back and look through the recorded sessions. Pretty sure nobody in either the San Diego game or the Galactic game, maybe once in the last San Diego game, maybe once, I think a player was, went hardcore. But it's very rare in those games for them to do that. And I think it's because I think they are just kind of seeing the pool as this kind of nice little bank that kind of bumps along, rather than as this precious thing that, you're going for the gusto, on something. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Christopher, I don't know if he used every last pool die, but he used a whole lot of them. And he ended up rolling 9 dice, and he got 1-1.
There you go. That's exciting.
So, and again, it has no mechanical, identity, but you're right. Purely at the level of me and my instrumentation, it has weight. And and I think that was maybe the only big ass pool dump that I saw in that particular game. The Galactic game, yeah, that tends to be. Again, I'll have to double check. I think as things kind of ramp up a little bit, they're grabbing a little more as they go, which is all to the good. And I was really hoping for it for both of these games, and I didn't get it. Was more players.
Yeah,
I want to be playing the pool with 5, 6, 7 players, not 2.
That's interesting.
I want a lot of people rolling about a lot of different things. I want a lot of diversity of pool dice use in the heat of the moment, and diversity of what different people do with monologues, and I also want a lot of change on those sheets. I want
Yeah.
to see. I want to be able to look at 5 different characters after 5 sessions of play with a nice little, proleptic sequence of what this trajectory of textual development has done.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
because there's a lot to learn there. And as I think I keep mentioning, I want to be in one of those groups as a player.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'd rather do that these days.
Well, it's kind of taken off in my imagination just to and has sort of started replacing like other games on the list to try. I'm like, I think I'm just going to do
Right.
start up another pool game on Friday nights rather than something else. Just because it does, once you start kind of seeing the possibilities, like I was saying, you can, and not even tweaking the rules, not
Right,
changing
exactly.
them, but
But the
just
tune and how it
you can
applies
really,
this time. Yeah. Yeah.
it's quite interesting, and then the just really seems to fit like a lot of different like a lot of different idioms, like as you're seeing in your games, with
Yeah.
they're sort of very different.
That's
Yeah.
for sure. And I also think that it is an immense learning tool for everybody when you play.
Yeah. Oh
If
yeah.
you
Yeah.
once you start taking this perspective on it that I'm trying to foster, um, I think people walk away with it not just with thoughts or feelings or outcomes from the pool as such. They're looking at the games they know
Yep.
and saying, okay, now wait a minute. What does this game do? How does it do that? And one of the things that I have noticed for a long time is that there are actions that characters can take, or perspectives that players can have, or that GMs can have, or different, and about all aspects of play, making scenes, bringing in backstory stuff, where things come from, how do they appear in play, all sorts of stuff, not just
Mm-hmm.
actions and resolutions, but everything. There are whole zones of content that a given group simply never does
Yep.
because they know the rules they're using don't know how to do it. And so they just don't do that.
Yeah.
And they often don't know that this is the case. So understanding that aspect of rules and rules use, I think, is a huge part of being a much more self aware role player. And that the pool has a nice way of kind of exposing these things to you, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so that's a big part of it. Anyway, thanks. I don't have any more
Yeah.
questions for you. Don't know if you did. You run out too?
Yeah, I ran out. Well, yeah, the last one was just wanted to know about your guys going all in or not. But this is glad to share some thoughts, and I'm gonna try to write up more about for the site
I'd
about what we've
love
been
to
doing
see
as
that. I
well.
mean, I know it's after a little while, you're kind of like, oh man, how many sessions have we played? Oh, this is a monster. But completism isn't really, required. So,
I like to come up with like one issue and
yeah.
then only give enough context to give that issue, only give enough other detail to give that issue context. And,
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
So I
so
look forward to that because
sounds good.
if other people are feeling similar to you, and we end up with a lot of different people playing the pool with a lot of different other people, we're going
Yes.
to have a really nice bank of work
Yeah.
for a shared vocabulary.
Yeah.
It's the
So
plan.
it sounds like fun. Well,
Excellent.
thanks for talking with me,
No, thank you.
and
Absolutely.
I will. We'll see you around. And I do want to. The other post, not related to the pool, but I am working on a post about my Champions Now game, which that's on. We're into like almost. We're 3 months away from 2 years of it. So
Man, so if you
playing about monthly, so sort of
right,
like a comic schedule.
still though, I mean, if you're talking from either 2 to 4 experience points or 2 to 4 points per session,
Yeah.
you're looking at some substantial change to those sheets.
Yes.
which
I'm a big
is
guy, so
the huge part of the game. So I'm really looking forward to talking about that.
I've got some stuff to say about that. So I'm working on that as well now.
Excellent. Talk to you later, Jon.
Bye.